Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's panel, The Color of Money, Equitable Economic Development. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm very excited about today's panel because I have with me a group of very distinguished gentlemen from all areas of the financial sector, including Jason Fields from Economic Development. I am Dr. Ramon Ortiz from the School of Business at Madison College, and it's my pleasure to serve as your moderator. Let's just take an opportunity at this moment to introduce the guest that we have with us right now. So feel free to take it away.
Hello, my name is Ron Millsap, and I'm a director with BMO, where I lead our industry vertical teams and our special purpose credit programming, where we're opening up capital access for women, Blacks, Latinx, and Native-owned organizations across our footprint. I had a 20-year career in community banking, headquartered here in Chicago, Illinois. A Morehouse graduate. I've been married for 15 years now. Have a wife and two beautiful kids, where I really like to spend time with outside of my day-to-day job. And just really excited to engage this audience in this conversation. And thank you guys for having me.
Great. Thank you, Ronald. Dominique?
Hey, I'm Dominic Johnson, managing partner at Mass Mutual. I've been in financial services, investments, insurance, financial planning for about 10 years now. And when I'm not hard at work, I have my wife Taylor, and I have three beautiful children that takes up the rest of that time. So that's me. I went to UW-Madison, studied personal finance.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Hey everybody, Jason Fields, and y'all know Henry Sanders gonna kill me for holding up everybody. Jason Fields, I'm president and CEO of Madison Region Economic Partnership. We are an economic organization that covers 8 counties in the state of Wisconsin. Backgrounds, former stockbroker and portfolio manager, and former Wisconsin State legislator. Married with my wife, 5 years, no kids, and so I'm realizing, brothers, I don't run nothing.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. As I said earlier, I'm extremely elated about this panel because it's something that's of central importance to our country, to our society, to our community. You know, when we talk about demographic shifts, we all hear general numbers thrown about that, you know, people of color will be the majority by 2050. But one of the things that we don't emphasize enough is that that is the case. And they will also comprise about 55% of the labor force. There's a tremendous amount of economic potential there, tremendous amount of commercial and entrepreneurial energy, which makes this conversation that much more relevant because we also understand that not all groups of people in this country have had access to the same opportunities as the majority. So with that said, I would like to start our conversation with the very first question, and this is open to the entire panel. Feel free to jump in at your leisure. And then when you're done, anybody else can jump in as well. How important is it to understand the roots and patterns of structural systemic racism and economic development before we address the issues associated with it? And how do these longstanding systems and practices help source the inequities in economic development? And how do they inform the changes that need to come? The floor is open, gentlemen.
I'll take a stab at it. I think if you don't understand it, if you don't know where you're coming from or where you came from, how do you know where you're going? And so in order to understand some of the systemic racism, it's important because we have to look at where it stems from, where it comes from, how it's enacted. And that's through policy, that's through legislative policy, that's through economic development practices, that's through business practices, that's through cultural diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, or the lack thereof. If you don't address these things on all those scales, then things will just stay the same. We'll do a lot of lip service, right? But nothing will change. So when it comes to policy, what are those policies that will make things equitable? Meaning, you know, what kind of laws are on the books that prevent us from getting our fair share of the economic piece of the pie? And then from an economics point of view, what kind of practices from corporations to government municipalities are put in place? Where do they need to change? And then just from broader perspective, how do we get Black and brown, underserved demographic people in positions of power? And that's not just management positions. That's who's on the board, right? Who's the president leading those organizations? Where are the people that look like you and I in positions of power to help facilitate and make that change? And so those are the kinds of things that if we don't understand that it kept us out of that, our activity energy should be going towards those things to continue our economic success and to get a piece of the pie.
Great, thank you. Ronald and Dominique, you guys have any insight you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think my context around this question is one in which I came to learn through career experiences in financial services. So, the importance of kind of understanding the history of institutional racism, policies, things that have created the wealth gap as we know it today. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I lived in a neighborhood in a community that at that time I didn't understand was part of the legacy of the Black Belt. The Black Belt was restricted communities in Chicago where when my grandfather got home from fighting the war, he couldn't leverage his GI Bill to actually go out and purchase a mortgage. He had to rent on contract. And there were only certain places in the city of Chicago on the south and west side. I'm sure, Wisconsin and cities like Milwaukee and other places are not too dissimilar in this regard, that you kind of had, codified institutional racism in housing policy in a way that if you didn't understand that, so I went and bought my house when I first got married, and I didn't understand the legacy and the history of all those policies and how they would ultimately affect the value of my home. So having gone through a couple of recessions and not seeing my home benefit from the same equity that my majority counterpart has on other parts of the city, not so much south and west side where Blacks were once again restricted in those early stages. So here we're now, 30, 40, 50 years removed from that. But the damage had already been, had taken its toll and has been perpetual in a sense because there hasn't been systemic policy to reverse it. So I think the importance of understanding that it came by way of my experience in banking, where I got learnings around community development, financial institutions, and got exposed to different readings and learnings. But the average layperson, I would say, a lot of those policies and systems we're kind of blind to. I don't know all the environmental policies that may be affecting my community, but it's affecting the very air I breathe. So where you may not think it's important to understand that legacy of how we got here, there's no way possible you can begin to contextually unpack that to be able to really work, not in intent, but real strategy and execution to move the needle on some of those barriers that are invisible to most, but still very much exist today.
Awesome.
Very
I
thoughtful.
think just to jump in and piggyback, thinking about the wealth gap and the research that I put in my own industry, which is a lot different. Ultimately, understanding the history of where financial planning and economic development has come from is extremely important, especially when you think about the things that are not systemic to continue to push us forward. But the first Black CFP was LeCount Davis, and I think that was in 1978, and it's just so recent. And then you think about the tools that are in place that we did not have access to until the late 50s, late 60s, life insurance, investments, different things that can create generational wealth. Those things weren't even accessible to us until companies acknowledged that not only we did not have access to them, now these companies had to offer them to Black and brown communities in a way that they never had before. And I think that just understanding the history that came, or I guess the history that was, that impacted us in such a way today, allows us to create new ideas and a new platform for us to continue to grow in our community.
Yeah, some very good points. We were talking about the free market system as it exists has ushered in tremendous amount of prosperity in the United States from World War II onwards. But at the same time, this free market, hasn't always been accessible to everyone, right? Whether you're talking about redlining that occurred in Chicago, if you're talking about socially institutionalized discrimination in the form of segregation. You have periods 1950s, I believe it was, where African American men had the highest labor participation rate. They were also socially segregated. So again, inhibiting access to the vehicles that people use to build wealth, right? So those are very important things. So let me sort of bring your conversation to how programs and initiatives can be used in a targeted approach with communities of color, right? And in particular, think about access to capital.
I take this one, and I think about it in a couple of ways, because I don't think there's been the type of urgency around the desperate impact to the legacy of slavery and its impact on Black and brown people, particularly Black people, since these last couple of years through the pandemic and the killing of George Floyd. And I think it shone just a bright light just on how far we are away from being able to even get close to being able to redress some of the real inequities that are in the system. But it's a moment that I don't want us to forget anytime soon. And it's a moment that I want us to continue to live in as practitioners, particularly those folks that are in banking and are able to take different seats of leadership, so that we're not taking a blind eye to where we can actually leverage the power of our systems to make continual community impact. It's good to see more housing development and things of that nature. It's good to see social services supported through philanthropy and things of that nature. But the economics of the number of employer-led organizations in our community, most folks are solopreneurs. So this access to capital issue is one in which is near and dear to my heart, because if you can't get that small business access to capital, they can't move from that solopreneur to being able to hire multiple folks, typically within their own community, to drive real social change. If we don't have access to those same opportunities, we continue to find ourselves behind that pendulum where we're almost at everyone else's table asking for handouts, as opposed to really going at the opportunities that exist in the free market to build businesses of scale that can truly be impressive. I think Detroit and Chicago are some of the examples that I kind of look at from yesteryear. And then I have a financial planner that's on the panel, and I think about why those same legacy institutions, Ebony's and the Jets of the world, don't exist today. And a lot of it was just not having the same resources of planning and things to kind of set that next generation up. But I think we are in a moment now where folks are going back to historically Black colleges and university. There's an affinity within the Black community to buy Black and to support organizations that are giving back to the community. It's just like a renaissance, if you will. And I think this is a great opportunity for banks to see those opportunities and take some bets and create programs that can really get behind those businesses, because they will be the businesses of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years that have the ability to not ask for a handout, but employ someone in their community and really drive social change on the ground. So we can't be blind to that. We have to hire folks that look like myself, that can go out there and make those small business loans. We have to put people in our institution in places of leadership where they can continue to pull levers of change. And when we have big, broad commitments of what we're going to do, we need to be transparent in terms of how we share that information out, and also transparent in how we engage economic development partners to move the work forward.
No, I love what Ronald just said, and I appreciate it. Takes me back to Dr. Ortiz, when the George Floyd incident occurred. I had all these folks white folks call me and say, Jay, we want to help. And I was like, okay, great. What does that help look like? And I'm gonna say this because some people got upset when I said most of the programs that I see geared towards Black and brown folks are garbage. And that's not to be offensive, but like Ronald said, most of it is social stuff. And again, I'm a former stockbroker, and if we really want to talk about where we need help, sometimes it's technical help, but a big piece of that pie is who gonna start ponying up and making and investing in Black-owned, women-owned venture capitalists. Who's going to start investing in real estate developers that look like all of us, so that they can go and start getting in on some of these municipality contracts? We read a number of headlines that all these banks and places are giving money, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that. But they were tied into like programs. But did those programs go far enough? And what I liken it to is it was like a drug deal. And Ronald, I think you hit on it. Some of this stuff is geared towards just perpetuating a cycle of dependency. It's not sustainability to empower people to get to a level where they can in return empower their own communities. The magic number is around $250,000 for a solopreneur to start generating sales revenue to get to a point where they can start hiring other people. If you look at the venture capital spectrum, if these same organizations wanted to help or wanted to really do an impact, they could have did it in a sense where, let's invest some equity into some situations, not all debt. Let's invest some equity into some situations, because in the venture capital spectrum, it'll say, well, we know that most people get their money, they start from friends and family. Well, hell, if you probably didn't have a great number of friends and family who could just write you out a check for $20,000, $50,000 to start your own venture. So that model right out the gate is old. And then it's your network. Who did we all know that could do that? So if you didn't have the network or the friends and you wasn't in the system, how are you going to get help outside of a government program talking about, well, we don't give grants, we'll give you a loan. And so I think what that George Floyd, what I hope it did, and I think it did, but we still got a ways to go, we got to get out of more of let's just put these programs up and say we did some because it gives us a nice headline. Let's start talking about ponying up and investing in these businesses, and not just investing, but giving them the technical help that they need to be sustainable. Tie that into now this energy where, we are taking seriously shopping with our own. You know what I mean? We're getting out of that mindset where white ice is colder or cooler. And so I think when we start looking at these things, and it takes leaders to, number one, I'll say this, a lot of times it takes leaders who are not afraid to lose something, because typically they go to these leaders who embed, and that's cool. But then when you start speaking truth, you get pulled into the closet. And so we got to start having people who have the know-how to say, look, this is not a handout. This is an investment. I'm gonna give you this all example, then I'm gonna shut up. I get this thing where part of my job is to raise money for my organization. And I got some brothers here, Henry knows them. We all love each other, we cool. But they'll say to me, well, Jason, we already gave to a Henry Sanders. We already gave to Alex G or Reuben Hopkins. And it's like, so because you gave to one black person, you good, you've arrived. Not understanding that we all do different things. And so when we're talking about giving capital, we got to really look at why is it that most of the dollars, big number dollar amounts, 1% is given towards Black fund managers, Black equity fund managers. That's even less for women. So if we really want to start getting into this game, more people don't keep just hitting us with programs. Talk to us about investing equity in developing a fund manager where they can invest in the kinds of businesses that that our community needs. And in addition to that, to make it sustainable, we as a community got to have an approach where we got to get out of this mindset of just mom and pop shops, retail shops, hospitality shops. We need some bioscientists. We need some people in STEM. We need some businesses that can be put into the supplier diversity panel or line to contract out with some of these bigger organizations. So if we really want to start changing the narrative on this thing, let's ease up on the programs and let's start writing some bigger checks to people that look like us to do some investing in businesses in our communities.
The chat said that you got a couple of amens on that. Just putting it out there, Jason. Ronald, Dominique, any additional insight that you want to
I
add?
got my Baptist preacher suit on today, y'all.
I think just a few pieces. I love what Jason said about injecting dollars and not just debt into the community. I think that's really important, and I think that if there is programs and initiatives out there to really just start the education at a base level, I think that education is really important when it comes to building up young Black and brown children. You know, I think that there's more than one way to make it these days, and whether it's through STEM or whether it's through a diversity of education, I think that we need to start talking to our children sooner about investment accounts, about starting to grow their net worth. What is net worth? What is debt? How do we make it happen? Because when I think about my conversations with different communities of people, white people talk, when their kids show up, they have 50,000, 25, any type of amount of money that we don't have, so it's like at some point we have to stop starting from the first generation of money, and we have to start looking out to future generations. And something I always talk about is like, maybe George Floyd, if he has a $5 million life insurance policy on his life, maybe it doesn't happen the way it does. And I don't mean to say that in any type of way, but if we can inject money in the form of generational wealth, maybe we stop getting killed disproportionately, because companies are going to have to pony up and start paying money out. I think that there is going to need to be someone or something out there that injects money to really reverse just the systemic side of things that we have to deal with today. And I think that's why we all here.
Ronald, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think the brothers did an excellent job of covering that question, and I don't have much to add to it.
So I'm gonna take bits and pieces of what people said. I'm gonna weave it into another question that I want you guys to think about. So one of the things that Jason talked about, the vast majority, I think it's like 67 or 70% of small businesses start with either personal savings or money borrowed from family members or what have you. We know that like 2% of actual businesses are started with government-backed loans. So something like that, 2 to 3%, very small percentage. And as you talk about access to capital, Jason mentioned venture capital, right? Geographically speaking, you have major centers where venture capital is concentrated and dispersed. New England, New York, you have Silicon Valley, and you have the rest of California around San Francisco area. So geographically speaking, those are areas where you have high concentrations of people of color. From a geographic standpoint, you have proximity to capital. You clearly have people there, so you have latent markets. So what is falling short?
I'll take a stab at this one. I think So one of the things that fall where we fall short is some race stuff, is some cultural stuff, and quite honestly, it's fear. I'm gonna tell you what typically happens. We here in the Midwest, because we are, with Chi-Town a little bit different though, because they got a bunch of black money managers and brothers and sisters who are prime time. On the VC level and equity level, particularly when you look at Wisconsin, there's this very conservative kind of culture, and it's a good old boys network. Meaning, if we don't know you, that's you got to get over that hump. And then even when we do know you, we're always asking, well, who do you have first? So this mentality of, well, who invested first, and that's prevalent here in Wisconsin. You go to those places you just named, Doc Ortiz, and they like to hell with who you got first. They want to be first. They want to be the first people into market. Here we have this culture where everybody is rushing to be second. Like, if Dominic and Ron put together and got this good group, and I got this group, and we all four of us put together a company and say, hey, we're going to raise 10 million. You got four educated brothers who know what they doing, got credibility, and we'll have a hard time trying to raise money. You want to know why? Because the question was, well, who came first? Not mentioning the fact that we all done managed millions and did all this stuff. So to a certain degree, it's not even a skill set thing sometimes. It's a cultural, well, you got to get somebody first before we come on. And so you deal with that kind of attitude. And then when it's a smaller area like a Wisconsin, we don't have funds at that level where you're talking about 50 million. In fact, one of the projects that I'm working on, you all, is to bring a black and man woman team. I can't mention them now because but I gotta import heavy money managers from elsewhere who want to invest in our companies. Wisconsin is just now getting Dana Guthrie, who's great, Gateway Capital fund manager, 10 million, I think. You got Corey Nettles, who's private equity, good dude. I mean, we're just now getting into the market of people who managing funds here, like literally. And so I think it's a question of, one, who has the money? It's old money. And then two, what happens is we lose upcoming hot talent because, case in point, and then I'll be quiet. I have two brothers who I know, great brothers, y'all. They, like a lot of us, they had some problems, came back up, picked themselves up by their bootstraps, got great stuff, great inventions, great processes, smart as all know what. Couldn't get a hand here. Moved to the West Coast, Doc Ortiz, called me up and said, Jay, I'm doing great here. Went to Silicon Valley. Those folks looked at them brothers and said, hey, we like what you doing. So even when we have the talent, who gonna be here to go, you know what? I'm gonna invest in them. So we're just now getting to a point where we got people of color managing funds to invest in people of color. And it's 2023 and we literally just now getting to that point.
I think the title of the conversation, The Color of Money, is apropos. I think relationships, much to everything that Jason spoke to, become one of those things that, absent it, you don't have capital at all. And capital comes in many forms and manifestations. So when you speak to those 3 or 4 centers of America in which we have proximity, but don't have relationship, is because those communities are not engaging with our communities by and large. So proximity means nothing if you're not at the table. Proximity means nothing if you're not going to break bread and have a relationship with somebody that brings a different worldview or perspective than your own. And probably has, maybe a little to do with race and more to do with class. When you really kind of break down some of the structures or barriers to having folks that, because don't get it wrong, they're black money managers, not nearly enough. and not managing the same type of capital as some of their counterparts. Or even when you think about companies being formed that are getting VC money, how many of those are going to fail? So I think it also speaks to conditioning of we have great innovators in our community, but there's a fear factor too, because I don't have these relationships. I don't look like the other majority, and I may not get the same opportunity to present my concept or idea and get real follow along or tag along. Those are the problems. There's so many different iterations of solutions that are coming on board. Women-led funds, Black-led funds, LGBTQ-led funds. There are a lot of different things that are coming on board that are, great because they're part of the solution. So even more so than that's necessarily like, you have to have education, you have to have, policy and other things that are still working in the background, because you're not gonna change the course of capitalism in America because it was set up a certain way for certain folks to win, and those folks have long been winning, and it's not something that you easily get invited to. Once again, more so about class. I can't go and be a part of an investment circle unless I have a certain level of assets under my own personal belt to get access to opportunity before they come to the stock market. That's where real wealth is made, that early investment cycle, right? So those are all the things we know that are barriers, so to speak. But it's good to see the prescriptions that are coming on board, because people are, probably tired of beating their head up against the wall waiting for somebody else to change it. And you have to go kind of full bore, both in that space of taking young fund managers, diverse fund managers, and having them partner with larger funds in a mentor-mentee type capacity, so that they can shadow and walk them down those hallways and open up those boardrooms and make those phone calls. You're seeing great examples of that. All these innovation hubs and tech hubs that have Kickstarters and different campaigns that take folks early stage and start to work with them and invest into their circle of VCs has been happening for a while. So all those are like good signs. So I think we need to find more of the things that are working and really bring more visibility and light to those, whether they're working in LA or working in Chicago. How do we replicate that model in Wisconsin? How do we partner with that fund to they made some footprints in the sand. How do we now kind of walk alongside them and not try to do it from scratch? Because I think sometimes, whether you're talking philanthropy, business, investment, like there's a lot of folks that are starting or wanting to do things that already exist in the market. And I think you're going to run into issues of having folks write big checks, whether you're in the supply chain or trying to raise money for a fund, if you haven't brought those collection of ideas and people together to create real opportunity for scale, right? So look at the examples of what's out there, scale it. Don't necessarily have to recreate the wheel, scale it. Become another tentacle of what somebody else is doing and feel like you need to launch out necessarily on your own. But no, I love the conversation, because I think it is that color part, because you have to have some real authentic representation where folks will go to bed and say, though, I really am in this journey because I'm doing it on behalf of my authentic representation, and who I am as a Black man is a part of my identity. So it's not, that part is important to me. And I realize that other Black men, other Black women that look like me don't get the same opportunities. I mean, they have the same opportunities I have, so I'm fighting for that on behalf of them. But let's keep looking for the examples and shine bigger and brighter lights on those, and look for collaboration and partnership.
Great. Dominique?
Yeah, I just think I think that, Jason, you're right about it being a lot different here in Wisconsin and in the Midwest, because here I think one, that the average financial advisor is a 60-year-old white guy, and so especially me and my team, we have a lot of different diversity, and we are the first. I think so. On one side of it, you talked about someone being the second. Oh, you go invest with this person first and tell me how it is, and if it's good, then I'll join you. I think that what being in Wisconsin and having a great pension system, it created it created a great retirement for folks as they work up in the state system. They can retire, but the difference between a pension and a 401k is that you can't disperse your money how you want to. You have to work there a long time, and then you're going to get the money back monthly in retirement. And so people don't have these nest eggs to take and disperse and invest in ways that, if they see an opportunity to invest, they just don't have it. And I think that's not everybody, but I think that's what stops the VC from really happening here. And then once you are to the top of your game, you have to find someone that doesn't look like you to back you. And I think that's a part of that. That's why people get up and go, because they want to find someone that, like Ron, you brought up the mentor-mentee capacity. It's just harder to find. And so I think that, one, I love having this conversation and working through this stuff with you, because I think collaboration is the way to make it happen. And so, yes, that's what I got.
Thank you. Very profound insights from all of you. So now let's take a step back and let's get a little philosophical. And I think it's a very important discussion to have to define inclusive economic development, because many times when you talk to people who are talking about social justice and social change, and you speak about inclusive economic development, while their heart may be in the right place, some of their talking points speak to models that maybe allude to centrally planned solutions that we know aren't always as effective. You're not going to completely change the economic system that we live in. So how do you define inclusive economic development? Anybody?
I didn't want to hog up the mic. I think you got to be mindful, right? Inclusive can be good or bad, right? I mean, sometimes the problem that I think I have when we start saying inclusive so much is that it almost comes across that Black and brown people can't do nothing unless white people at the table or you know what I mean? And so inclusive doesn't mean, we can't do things ourselves. I look at inclusive mean there's an ally, there may be a partnership. And so case in point, I have a project where it's combining urban and rural areas in collaboration. Is Black and brown people, urban, rural white people, right? I mean, let's not sugarcoat any of this stuff. But at the same time, the component that is in the city is designed for Black and brown people to get at the table and then to look at how they can create opportunities with rural business people. So on one hand, it's inclusive. There's a component of can we work together, but there's also a component of how do we make sure we are taking care of our community because it has the most need. So it's inclusive in that sense. It doesn't mean, I use Pastor G, for example. Pastor G building his cultural center, and he's doing it with Black folks on the construction level, on the design level, but yet at the same time, there's a component where he's fundraising with multicultural people. To me, that's inclusive. I think he's found a way to target helping members in his community, in his direct community. And so I think for me, that's how I look at it as inclusive. We can all work together toward a common goal, but it shouldn't be at a point where every time black and brown people want to do something to uplift themselves, we got to check in with folk. Does that make sense? Or it can't be done unless everybody is at the table. So I think we have to just be very mindful of what that inclusive means. To me, the inclusive mean there's a value added proposition. It's a win for all of us, but we know that.
Yeah. I think with this one, like when I think about inclusive, like in human-centered design, I was doing a human-centered design project for a leadership program that I was in, and we were having to come up with a project to benefit a community. We were working in the Chatham community on the south side of Chicago. And our project or theory around our human-centered design work really required listening, spending a lot of time with different community stakeholders and hearing about issues that they had in the community and trying to get to some of those root causes, and then really designing a project around what the community conveyed. Inclusive economic development is one in which you understand the problem you're trying to solve for, you're listening to all of the stakeholders, and you're trying to make sure that as you come up with a problem solution statement, that you're really listening to all those different things before you start getting into actual solution mode. And one example that I think was really interesting, and I use a lot of context around, I guess, where I'm from and experiences I've had, but watching the Obama Obama construction project, which is a rock's throw from the neighborhood I currently live in the Woodlawn community. And the work behind the scenes, fighting with the local community on where the library would be located, multiple lawsuits, fight on behalf of the community, get some type of community benefits agreement that made sure that as that library was being built, folks weren't going to get displaced. They would have opportunities to get jobs, work on the construction, and the list kind of goes on. And that team really kind of worked really skillfully and masterfully, in my opinion, to actually get through the legal hurdles and get to the point where, they're in the ground and building the site. And one of the biggest wins was watching 4 Black-owned construction firms, Brown and Moman, Power and Sons, Safeway Construction, and Ujamaa Construction, kind of look at the paradigm of how minority contractors would bid projects in Chicago and decided rather than go at it alone, that they would form a coalition. And in forming that coalition, they identified a majority prime contractor to also be a part of that bid. That joint venture was named Lakeside Alliance. That's $1 billion project and probably the first of its kind that I can think of that brought a team of diverse minority contractors together with a large majority contract on a project of that size. And that's some real checks being written there and a real opportunity for those 4 Black-owned construction firms to actually get equity, scale, experience, and all kind of opportunities that can roll off the back of that. And I think whether that's in media, whether that's in entertainment, whether that's in law, we have a lot of excellence within our community, but sometimes it's like desperate. It's only one person doing it. Is there anything to rival Facebook? Is there anything to rival some of these tech companies from a minority perspective? Typically, no. So when you go into a large institutional player and you're trying to get in their supply chain or trying to get VC investment, you don't have the same scale of some of the other players that are in the market. So I think we have to rethink, like, yeah, we've been locked out of the game for a long time, so we're naturally behind. But one way we can kind of, fast forward and get momentum is kind of rethink the paradigm of how we're doing business and really look for other excellent examples. And I talked about this earlier, of coalition building and partnership building to move the needle.
I love it. And I think inclusive economic development to me ultimately is there's less inequalities and more things are equal for people to go to the workplace. We have large competing companies like Ron mentioned that are minority owned. These companies have stability. And I think to keep it short, the more we can build confidence in the economy and we can educate, those that are younger than us, that are coming up with us, and ultimately lift as we climb. Not say, oh, I got the bag, so you figure it out on your own now. I think that's where we have been, and I think that we are moving into a space that is more growth driven. But I think that, like I said, just being able to lift as we climb, coming up with more mentor-mentee relationships that might not pay us now, but it will pay the community later is really important.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I do have a lot of other questions, but let's open up the questions. Let's open up the forum to questions from the audience. Question to everyone. Institutional social psychological racism practiced by people who look like us, people of color, almost as much as those in the white majority community. Note that my indigenous community professional friends have been treated similarly. Any comments on that? Okay, so I'll read that again.
I got a comment to that.
Mm-hmm.
Your color, your ethnicity, your beliefs, they don't define character. Mm-hmm. And as much as sometimes we like to, typecast folks based on their color, their ethnicity, and think that everybody is a monolith and operates in the same way, is just not human experience. So where I see in institutions, or where I see in government, whether at the local or federal level, individuals that may look like me, but don't share the same values and lack when it comes to true character, it's part of life. So I don't write the whole of my community off on the back of one or two people who may very well be leveraging their community to get the access that they have while denying their community at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think my hope is that those situations are more outliers, and when we encounter it, that we authentically bring awareness to it. Mm-hmm. So that as I think once you go through experiences with people and they show you who they truly are, you have to believe them.
Yeah.
For good, bad, or indifferent, you have to believe them. And you're always going to come across individuals in your journey that have bad character, bad form, no matter what they look like and how they move through life.
All right. Jason Fields, Dominique?
I agree with Ron.
Yeah, I'll add a comment here because I think they're talking about people of color in general. One of the things I say is we use that term very broadly. And I think as people of color, when we're the minority and we're clearly outnumbered by the majority, we tend to coalesce. When we become large in numbers, whether this be in whatever geographic area, our ethnic identity sometimes takes center stage. And I think that we as people of color have the responsibility to recognize that when we're in positions of power, we cannot begin to act like others that we critiqued before. And it's not, I look at this question, I see it as being possibly divisive to divide people, because you can make that case with any group. For instance, you look at Miami, right? Tremendous number of lawsuits, discrimination lawsuits against the city of Miami by people, Black entrepreneurs seeking access to a city that's predominantly controlled by Latinos. At the same time, you can go to Atlanta. You have a tremendous number of lawsuits lobbied by Latino business members against a city that is predominantly dominated by Black power structure. So depending on where you go, you're always going to get that. And I think as people of color, we have a responsibility to recognize the commonality that we have in the plights of our brothers and sisters of other ethnic groups and other races, and strive to not become like our oppressors when we are in a position of power. That's how I would answer that. Any other questions from the audience? None that I see here. So I will throw another one out there. How can technology be used to create economic opportunities, to disrupt the status quo and create economic opportunities? And when I say technology, I'm speaking broadly: social media, customized micro printing, whatever you want.
I'll jump in here. And I know I'm talking a lot about educating the younger community. I think that, one, technology like Robinhood, E-Trade, it's easier to invest today than it has been any other time in the world, and so the United States. And so I think that we have to meet the children where they are with technology, just in the financial space. Get kids accounts sooner. Make it a game, set a goal. Kids have Amazon on their phone. They can go and buy whatever they want and order it to their house, but get them a trust account. Get them an account where they can get on and invest in a brokerage account, buy some shares of XYZ out there. Because I think the earlier we can allow our children to use technology to invest and make some of these things more, I guess, allow them to participate, the more growth we have in the future. That's what I got.
I agree with everything Dominic said. I mean, you can start investing with $5. I'll tell you, I think most of us or most people use technology wrong. I'll say it like this: and when you look at TikTok, a Chinese company, here's my fear that most of us are not using these platforms and technology the right way to advance ourselves, whether intellectually or from a business point of view. China asked there was a question asked. A majority of Chinese students, more majority of American students, the Chinese students who had TikTok said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Most of them said astronaut. American students, TikTok users, when the question was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? They said a social media influencer. Now I want you to think about that brain, that intellectual capacity as to where we're going. You plot out on a map those kinds of answers, and you don't have to be a nuclear physicist to tell you where we're going to end up in the competition, because the way they use social media and technology is to empower their kids on the intellectual capacity. We using this to twerk, and I ain't knocking it. I mean, if that's your thing, that's your thing. But we using it to, we posting food pics. We out here at tier 1. I mean, we using it. We ain't using it for nothing. And so the business people who got businesses ain't even using it for their businesses. People are literally using technology as it's almost like a drug now. You get hooked on it. If you're going to use it, at least be prime time. Use it for your business. Use it to learn. Use it to increase your brand. So, the one hand, we're not using technology the right way, the majority of us. And then when we do, like Dominic said, we need to start early, because we got to understand this is a competition, man. This is a race. And right now, we are watching World Star. They people learning how to build rockets.
I think the gentleman already, pretty much addressed the question. Technology is already proven to be the great disruptor. Information and the flow of information is literally at the palm of your hand. In terms of creating new economic realities, and I get it, Jason, whether you knock it or not, social influencers, man, probably are doing better than me right now. And there's some kids. You're right, Ron. They are. There's some kids that are doing some things with sports gaming, and there's a whole arbitrage through being able to go through the Amazon of the world to sell products and services. Even through the success and or failure, perceived success and or failure of new digital currencies and things of that nature. I think there are many different ways to skin a cat, and I think we've all touched on this. Dominic, probably more so, just this early education and awareness. So where, what we can do for our community is teach them the right way to leverage these technologies, teach them the right way to monetize these different technologies, and be able to create, in some ways, invisible wealth that traditional industries based on class may not give the same opportunities to. So I say watch technology, watch it closely. Don't knock that next thing that may seem like a potential fad, because it could be industry busting. And some of these young folks are on the precipice of creating wealth like we haven't seen through technology. So for our communities, you need to be aware of it. You can enjoy it, but you also need to be educated about how to use it, because there's a way that you can get exponential growth. Even if you have a mom and pop shop, but you haven't leveraged technology to be able to find your customer, put them on a journey, and get them coming back over and over and over again to buy your service, you're missing the opportunity of what technology can unlock for your business.
Dominique, any quick remarks? We're pressing up on time here, so if you'd like to give some quick remarks.
So I think, thank you for having us. One last piece that, just to piggyback on Jason, learn something. My Instagram is people who are actually good at golf, so I can learn some new techniques. So when I get out there, I'm okay. Find something that you want to learn about when you're flicking through Instagram. Look up investments, look up trust accounts, generational wealth, whatever, get you to where you need to go instead of TikTok.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, it was definitely a pleasure having you on this panel, especially in light of Black History Month. We talk a lot about civil rights and social justice. I think it's imperative that we carve out a section to discuss economic empowerment. I think that's an area that is itself underlines all issues of social justice. The world is rapidly changing, real quick, timeline. In 1900, 1 out of every 8 people in the United States was non-white. In 2010, that was 1 out of every 3. And in 2050, that'll be 1 out of every 2. So the world is changing. It's becoming more diverse, and the issue of inclusive economic development will become more and more relevant. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the true essence of self-determination. So thank you very much. That concludes our program. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
This is 365 Media.